Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Movie Screeners Club podcast. I'm your host, Sophia Falk. The Movie Screeners Club is brought to you by Designing Hollywood Productions, in association with Gardena Cinema. If you want to win the chance to have your short film screened in a huge theater and the opportunity to be interviewed on our podcast, please submit your film today on our website, themoviescreenersclub.com.
I'm BC Jones. I'm the writer, director, editor, and one of the producers for the film The Red Hourglass. The Red Hourglass is about a very pious young virgin woman who, after a strange and unsettling encounter with a black widow spider, finds herself inexplicably pregnant. After the birth of the child, this shadowy cult begins to kind of form around her house as if drawn to the child by dark forces.
It's like Spider-Man meets Hereditary.
Wow, I've never heard that comparison before, but I'll take it. That's a lot of fun.
Pretty perfect, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty good. So I want to know, it really is like such a haunting short. What drew you into the horror genre? Are you a horror guy? Like, do you enjoy it, or just do you enjoy making it?
Oh, all of it. Yeah, I've been a horror fan since I was a young child. One of my all-time favorite horror films is Rosemary's Baby. So, cut to 2020, it's a crazy year for us all. But for me and my family, it was a very bittersweet year because the same week that we went into quarantine was the same week we found out that my wife was pregnant.
Wow.
So, so I have the anxiety of the world falling apart around me, and at the same time, I'm having the most wonderful thing happen, which is I'm having our first child, and so I took that anxiety, and I think I kind of just channeled it through into this story. And obviously, being a longtime Rosemary's Baby fan, it just seemed it seemed like a good fit for what I was kind of going through at the moment in my life.
Well, I'd hate to think that your anxiety kind of takes that level of terror, as it's depicted.
Yeah, well, there was all kinds of anxieties in 2020. I mean, you obviously had the pandemic, which was the mysterious thing happening. We didn't really fully know what was going on with it when it first started. And then, also at the same time, there was like crazy stuff happening in the streets, and fascism was on the rise and all this stuff. And so that really got me thinking about indoctrination. And that really became kind of the theme for the film. And so I had a character who had already been sort of indoctrinated through religious means, and then of course now she's being surrounded by this new sort of cult. So it's all kind of a metaphor for just sort of mass populations, putting their faith in sort of a strong man character, and putting too much into a leader. And so yeah, that was really always in the back of my head when I was writing this film.
Were you writing during COVID, or was it kind of like COVID happened and then you took a step back and you went, wow, that was fucking crazy?
Well, so I think like what kind of sparked this was I remember my son had been born, and one late night, because you're often with newborns rocking them in the middle of the night, and I think it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and he has, it's actually in the movie, it's called a hatch light, and it emits like different colored light. And so this red light's going, this white noise is going, and I'm sitting there rocking him to sleep in the middle of the night, half awake myself. And I was sort of like, wow, this is like a Dario Argento film, but with the soundtrack by David Lynch. And then I was like, well, that's cool. What's that? And so that just kind of started to get the wheels kind of going with the project.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds terrifying. I would not be able to handle it. I think I'd throw my son on the floor and run.
Oh God. Well, it was just, there was just kind of the mood in the room. I was like, oh, and that's what it made me think of, because I'm a horror guy. So,
right. So how do you build suspense, and like how does like the pacing affect the horror aspect of any movie that you make?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what I'm trying to achieve, with this, it was less about doing like a hyperkinetic kind of horror. It was
Mm-hmm.
more like a slow
Slow burn.
sense of dread just ramping up over and over again. So like when I was editing this and even when I was writing it, I was intentionally thinking like, okay, the beginning has to be kind of slow paced and stuff. There's a lot of like longer shots in it to kind of help, sort of elongate the pace of it. So I wanted this sort of brooding suspense because basically, like things kick off with the spider, and
Mm-hmm.
then and that's sort of like Hitchcock's classic, show the bomb, and then then the characters will go on talking amongst themselves and whatever, but the audience is aware of the bomb where the characters are not,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of like what the spider represented in this. So now we've shown the bomb and like, the audience is all like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen with this? Hopefully the whole time. So yeah, I was really kind of influenced a little bit by J horror in that regard, like just this sort of like slow, steady, slow burn kind of horror film, and that just kind of gets progressively more and more crazy as it goes along.
Right. This film is so psychological, and I'm curious to know like how have you found that like portraying that psychological feeling, like how do you do that through through visual scenes, something like that? Like how are you showing this anxiety? Like do you have a trick at this point?
No, so I construct the scenes based on the need of the scenes. I decide on like what film language is best to how to put the film together. A lot of filmmakers like shoot what's called coverage, which is like
Mhm,
I'll go in, I'll shoot a wide, a medium, a close up, etc. I don't actually film like that.
mhm,
My mom got me a book on Alfred Hitchcock when I was very young, and I read it. It was this like coffee table book, and it talked about how he completely worked from storyboards, and then he would just translate the storyboards to film. And that's how I thought all filmmakers worked. And so that's kind of how I wired my brain. And I remember even having arguments about this in film school. I went to film school and like the teachers were like, well, you have to shoot coverage. I was like, no, I don't. I'm like, I'm not going to. I
mhm.
was already stubborn at that point. So, although sometimes I wish I had shot more coverage. I'm in the editing room and I'm
Right.
like, oh, I could use some more shots here, but it is what it is. So, but yeah, no, I construct the sequences. They're all very well thought out, and
Mhm,
almost if you looked at the storyboards, it's almost like an A to B comparison.
mhm. When you're if you're running out of time, and most, on most sets,
Always.
you're always running out of time.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you do have to kind of cut shots, and that happened during this production. In fact, not only did we have to cut shots, if you I think I counted the shots that are in the film
Mhm,
itself, and there's well over 100 different setups in just this short film. But
mhm,
we actually shot more. There was stuff cut out of the in post.
mhm.
There were scenes I just didn't think worked. We reshot the ending. I didn't feel like the ending worked the way we'd shot it, and but yeah, back to your question though, on set, yes, we were we were always a little bit behind and stuff. So, sometimes you catch up, but like I remember particularly the day when we shot all the nursery stuff, we had a lot of setups in there. So I had to really consolidate things. I was
Mhm,
like, okay, I have to kind of get rid of this section. I had to think very fast.
mhm.
So, I mean, I think always just any director has to go in completely so prepared, like over prepared, like they just
Right.
know their film inside and out. And, you don't necessarily, I mean, you could go in with a backup plan, but I mean, it was just sort of like, I know what I could lose and then move on. So yeah, we did lose that. We actually also lost an entire chunk. I mean, I think it was on like day 3. There's like a scene where like she comes out of the bathroom and the whole house is like filled with cobwebs, and there's a little bit of that left in it, but it's just like close-ups and stuff. But like this was a much more elaborate, bigger scene in the film that we didn't even get to film. So but I had to make that choice. I was like, I'm running behind. We're not going to quite. I don't think we're going to get that. If there's one thing I can lose, it's that.
Right.
So.
The
Yeah.
art department was probably livid when they saw the final cut. We spent hours setting up that room.
No, 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 they never did it. No, they
Oh,
never
really?
did it. No, 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 no.
Oh, so
We
you
never did it. We
avoided
never
it completely.
sprayed the house down. It
Gotcha.
was just sort of like, forget at what point. I think I was shooting the bathroom stuff on
Mhm.
day 2 and
Yeah.
going, okay, we're just not gonna get to those scenes. We're just not
Mhm.
gonna, I mean, if there's anything that's gonna
Gotcha.
go, has to go, it's that. So
Mhm.
I kind of preemptively cut it. And it was right because we were still like we were
Still
still
over.
barely finishing, this stuff down to and especially I will say this to any filmmaker, never shoot in your own house, especially if you have a wife and kid. So, because we didn't even get to shoot full days in my house.
Mhm.
We had to shoot like 10-hour days because my wife and son had to come home and have dinner and go to bed and all that kind of stuff. So we had to shoot truncated days, and we had to like kind of reset the house like every
Mhm.
day back to, somewhat normal. So yeah, I would not recommend ever shooting in your own house to any filmmakers out there.
Actually, funny enough, I've learned that the hard way. I just shot a
Yeah.
mockumentary, and the last day was in my house, and I thought, "Oh, this is the last day of our shoot. It's fantastic. I will just go straight to bed right after we wrap because I'm
Hmm.
home." And I had to, and it only worked because my parents were helping act in it as well. So they were already on set and they had to be there to shoot, and so they weren't, kind of getting in anybody's business because they were the business,
Right.
which was
Right.
helpful. But,
Right.
you still it having that many people in your home, it's terrifying. It's probably just as scary as the movie itself. It's like
Yeah, no, it's an extra layer of anxiety, and it
right.
just, it's not really worth it just because it just causes so much like trouble for
Mhm.
an additional disruption in your just day-to-day life. So, yeah, I recommend finding a location and just biting the
Totally.
bullet and paying for it. So,
Big time. So do you this film is obviously about kind of not about necessarily, but it's inspired by your own life and your
mhm.
own kind of anxieties, your own feelings. Do you always write like that, or do you ever just take a break and say, you know what, maybe I'll write about somebody else?
Well, I do always write about someone else. It's kind of
Mhm,
weird. You can kind of go through my filmography, and I look at it and I'm like, my first film, Dada, which is like about these two brothers that,
mhm,
they have like they're like rival art dealers, and this other art dealer who they hate is always outbidding them on like Marcel Duchamp's artwork, which they're all obsessed with, and then they decide to go and steal the artwork back from
mm,
his house, and then
that's
hilarity
fun.
ensues. But like, and that was a really, where did that come from? I wrote that in art school, when I'm
Mhm,
learning about these
mhm,
stuff in art. So you can kind of always, there's always some element of my life that is getting into my
mhm,
work. And I think any good artist is taking from their life and like putting stuff in, this is a very personal thing to
mhm,
make art. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm never like, I mean, my wife is not the character in the Red Hourglass. This
mhm.
is a completely
I hope
different
not.
character. In fact, actually, she's more based on Carrie White from
Mhm,
the classic Stephen King story than
mhm,
anything. So, but it was just sort of like, yes, for this particular film, I funneled my anxiety into something. It's probably cheaper than therapy, or maybe
mhm.
not. I don't really know, but that's just
It
happened to be what this particular film is.
probably evens out
Yeah,
with,
probably.
like, post budget
Yeah,
and all that,
right,
everything that goes into it.
for sure.
So I have a question. I don't usually make horror, but I love watching horror. So I mean, Silence of the Lambs isn't really a horror movie, it's more of a thriller, but it's my favorite movie. And
I'd call it horror.
to me it's horrifying. To
Yeah.
me
No,
it's like
it's
it's
no, it's
scarier
genuinely
than anything else.
terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm so enamored by horror because it's so I mean, just the ability to make somebody feel like a physical emotion. Horror is a very being scared is a very physical emotion. You feel it
Yeah.
deep in your gut. And I'm just curious, like, I know sound plays a huge role in horror movies. At what point do you start thinking about sound? Like, while you're storyboarding, are you going, "Okay, violin strings are coming in now," like
I mean, a bit, yeah. I mean, I've certainly the score and the sound design took
Mhm.
longer than almost any aspect of
Wow.
this film. Brian Hawk, who was a longtime collaborator, he'd done the mixing and sound design for my first two films, worked on this as well. But yeah, and a new composer, Jason Miller, who I'd actually produced a music video for his band, the Lumerians, years ago with director Waylon Bacon. And he reached out to me at a New Year's Zoom party during the pandemic, and he was like, "Oh, you're making a horror film? Oh, cool. Well, if you need anybody to compose, let me know. That's what that's what I do." And so I did reach out to him, and he was just fantastic to collaborate with. He had so many different ideas, but we had to get there. We kind of almost gave ourselves boundaries. And music is the hardest thing for me because I'm not a musician inherently, but it's sort of like I had to kind of communicate. It's like, okay, well, she's religious. Maybe we do things with organ and choir and things like that. And we talked about scores that we liked, Suspiria and The Beyond and Phantasm and et cetera, and John Carpenter's scores and whatnot. And we kind of came to this sort of nice sort of blend. And I think what he did was just fantastic. It's a really really cool score. It was one of the things that I'm
Definitely.
probably one of the most happiest with.
Mhm.
And Brian just had so much work to do in terms of the sound design. But yes, I mean, I'm thinking about it in when I'm writing it, and then I'm building it when I'm editing it,
Mhm.
because I happen to edit this particular project. So the temp score was massive. I mean, it was just layers and layers and layers of tracks.
Wow.
We had to I had to simulate what I kind of wanted these sounds coming out of the baby monitor and all that kind of stuff to be like. And that was challenging because it was sort of it's such an abstract thing. You're like, okay, it should sound like a bug, but spiders don't really make sounds. And you're like, what is that? And I'm getting ideas from movies like Mimic and things like that. And just kind of just I'm building that too also in post. So there was sound is such a big part. I mean, ever since, Val Lewton made Cat People, I mean, sound design is, I mean, a lot of times when you're on set, it's not scary.
Right.
The thing. I mean, it could be gross, maybe there's an
Mhm.
effect or something like that. But it's going to be so much grosser when you add that icky, gooey kind of sound to go with it. So sound design and music they're almost carrying as much of the scares as much as anything.
Mhm.
There's not really any jump scares in this particular film, but it's more of a steady, suspenseful, brooding, creepy kind of just ratcheting up kind of suspense. And that is all done in the sound, and the baby sounds coming through the monitor. That was designed in a specific way. It's a little subtle at the beginning, and then it gets bigger, and then it gets bigger. And that was always initially in the even the scripts as well. It
Mhm.
was even described that in the scripts.
Awesome. Well, do you have anything kind of next up? Maybe another horror movie? Or are you gonna transition out of it?
No, no, actually, no. I love horror. I've written quite a few horror features, and actually, it's funny. While I wrote this as a short, I kind of fell in love with the character so much and the premise. I actually wrote a feature about
Wow.
for the Red Hourglass as well, which I'm, in kind of revision mode right now, and then I'm going to start looking for, seed money for that.
Mhm.
But yeah, definitely would love to develop a feature around that. Really excited about the where the feature script is right now because it's the similar to the
Mhm.
short, but it's also so much more and it goes beyond it in so many different ways, and it really excites me. But yeah, written quite a few horror films. I would be happy the rest of my life if I just could make horror movies, to be honest with you. If someone wants to give me money and send me off on their way, or if they have a script, a horror script, I'm probably down to do it. But yeah, and I also I host a monthly podcast called My Dad's Video Store, where we discuss blocks of films that go together, crazy things. Like we just did an episode on the 3D films of 1983 with
Mhm.
a guy named Eric Kurland who runs the 3D museum here in town. And so we do just pretty wild, and we have crazy guests on and stuff. And I have a couple of really fun co-hosts who I've been making films with and known for years on. So yeah, we do that on a monthly basis. And but yeah, other than that, just working in Hollywood.
Awesome. Well, that's the dream.
It's making movies. Yeah, it's
Enthusiastic. I like
yeah, yeah.
that. Well, thank you so much, BC. Please, everyone, come see The Red Hourglass at Gardena Cinema, October 17th. Thank you so much. So nice
Thank
meeting
you.
you.
Yeah, so nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
The Movie Screeners Club is produced by Designing Hollywood Productions in association with Gardena Cinema. If you want to win the chance to have your short film screened in a huge theater and the opportunity to be interviewed on our podcast, please submit your film today on our website, themoviescreenersclub.com. This episode was sponsored by Smokebreak Productions. Addictively entertaining.